Yeah. So if you've ever been in the debugging doom loop where you've been adding print statements to your code till the wee hours of the morning, or you're just not understanding what your program is doing, and which is commonplace for all developers, this is definitely a tool you should be looking at or considering.
I'm happy to announce that I am now taking sponsors for Unaligned. I'm proud to have AItop Tools as our first official sponsor. One of the most important things for me running my podcast is staying on top of the industry, knowing all the players and what they can do. I made a complete list of companies in the AI industry on X.com. But no one has as comprehensive a library of tools as AItop Tools. They break down products by use case, like productivity, media, chatbots, customer service, and more. A lot of companies are looking for the exact right tools for their needs, and there's no better place to find it than AItop Tools. Today, we're going to have a little bit of discussion about agents. AI agents are hot right now, and I'm real pleased to have you two on. Who are you?
Yep, I'll start. So my name's Alex Friedman. I am traditionally a data scientist slash machine learning engineer. Spent a handful of years working in the cybersecurity industry, basically building machine learning based anti-malware. So this was the era of kind of the first few waves of ransomware when that was a thing. Kind of transitioned more into ML ops and building production scale data pipelines for large banks and financial institutions. So somewhere along the way, I met my fellow co-founder Adam. We've just been bouncing ideas for years, and we realized kind of with the advent of ChatGPT and how sophisticated large language models were, you could do a lot more than chat with your PDF. And that's when we started building our own agents. And I'll let Adam take the rest of the story.
Yeah, awesome. So I come from like a business background, but always thought like in my job that I was doing that there was a lot of aspects of the job that were really repetitive and tedious, and these were aspects I thought could be replaced. And early in my career, I tried to find automations, but to say the least, there wasn't necessarily very easy ways for non-technical people to actually access these automations.
Yeah.
In March of last year, we actually built our first agent out. It was a data entry automation agent. So it would look at a PDF, would parse information from it, and it would upload it to an Excel file or an online form. And this agent, it worked really well, like 90% of the time. But in 10% of use cases, we were getting these nasty support messages saying that it was broken on like a drop-down form or broken on certain aspects on the web. And that was actually the inception of AItop. So we ended up building a debugging tool in-house to actually fix this agent to try and make it as reliable as possible. And we quickly realized that the actual market needed a tool like this, and that like observability was very important, debugging was super important. And the compliance surrounding AI agents is actually something that a lot of companies are missing when they're trying to bring their agents to enterprise.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing to add is that it's not just about observability of agents, which is a huge, question and issue. It really boiled down to the explainability. So our agent was breaking in a lot of places, and we had no way of understanding why. Sometimes it was core LLM logic. Sometimes it was actually errors with the script itself. But more often than not, we just had no kind of understanding behind the reasoning behind how this agent solved his own problems. And that was really how we arrived at this problem.
Yeah. Um, let's back up to 40,000 feet and talk to people who don't yet use agents. Why do they need to use agents? And what's the state of agents right now? And what, talk to people. Why do we need agents?
Okay, I can tell you this. I think from our perspective, there's a lot of tedious tasks they do as part of your day-to-day work that are not necessarily human tasks. And going back to the first agent we built, like data entry automation, like data entry is not necessarily the most human task. It's not something that like somebody wakes up in the morning and wants to do for 8 hours a day. This is something that's a requirement of their job, and something that a robot's actually significantly better than a human at doing. So there's certain workflows that people do every day. Think about anytime you are really interacting with your keyboard, if you're pressing, Command C or Control C, Command V or Control V, like there's a lot of like copy paste hell that people have to do as part of their jobs. And this is just like one example. There's a lot of workflows that robots are actually a lot better at completing than humans. And these are the aspects that I think a lot of the agent developers in the space are really honing in on. Are there aspects that can actually make people more human? Are there aspects of the work that are very robotic in nature and don't actually need human intervention? I think long term, if you can if you're at a company and you're trying to innovate, and try to think about like, what parts of my job are the most repeatable processes. These are the types of things that, there's huge innovation opportunities on, because it actually like long term makes humans more human. There's like the tasks that people don't really need to do. And if you can take them off people's daily plate, there's a huge opportunity there.
Like go and review two companies. You know, why you might have an agent do something like that. What tell us what people really like to use agents for? What are the top 3 or 4 things that people are broadly using agents for?
Yeah, I can name a couple. So number one that we've seen a lot of is actually doing research. So just as you mentioned,
Yeah,
so the idea is foundation models. They're basically trained up until a checkpoint in time, and everything after that, essentially, they don't have any insight as to what current events are or
like
events
why
that happened in the
Apple's
moment.
going down in the stock market
Yeah,
today or
why is
something.
Apple going down?
Yeah,
Exactly. So what we're seeing what a lot of agents do is they're plugging into kind of new data streams. So suppose like a news feed or a stock ticker feed, and they're collating that information as kind of like repository or kind of like some lookup index. And the agent's responsibility is to intelligently navigate and ask questions so that it can pull the right data for retrieval, synthesize it in some way, and present it to the user, or use that in a further step. So we're seeing a lot of research agents. I could probably name a few other ones.
Yeah, I think like research is really interesting because these are like repeatable processes. And a lot of times, like these large financial institutions that are working with, they have like an end point in mind. So that's like, I think, very interesting. A lot of web scraping type tasks. So you can have agents that go and build out entire sales pipelines for you. You can say, hey, I want to reach out to every chief information officer at every Fortune 500 company. It'll go on the internet, it will index LinkedIn, it'll pull all their data. It can use external data sources and pull all their emails into a single place. It can go as far as drafting outreach emails and having them in your drafts folder. So we're always keeping humans in the loop with the majority of agents we're working with right now. And the goal is that you can automate like a lot of this busy work. So if you're a sales guy, just as an example, your job should be being on sales calls 8 hours a day. The portion of prospecting leads takes a lot of time. The portion of following up with leads takes a ton of time, sending out contracts. And I think with agents, you can actually see like in sales, and we can go into a bunch of different verticals, but you will see individuals who full-time job is being an 8 hour, like 8 hours of calls a day. You have an AI companion who listens during the call, makes notes, creates follow-up tasks, sends out contracts, does all the prospecting for you before. And this is like really leaning into that aspect I talked about before about making humans more human. And we're really, really excited about it because the parts of sales that I personally love is like talking to people, meeting people, like actually sharing stories, not necessarily like sending out contracts or going back and forth trying to find a time to actually have a call.
yeah. It's a new way of working, and that AI and agents represent, and it's real interesting. Um, what mistakes do people make as they come into agents? Because you're ahead of everybody, right? You're working with bleeding edge businesses who are really, using technology aggressively. There's a lot of businesses out there that haven't yet gotten the memo and come into the AI world. So, what kinds of things can you tell them to prepare them for this world? What kinds
Yeah,
of
like
things should they be thinking about before they call you or use your tool or get your developer team all wound up and getting into this AI world?
I think the big thing is a lot of people try to boil the entire ocean with these agents, and everybody's trying to create these like AGI style agents that can do everything all at once. What we're seeing on the ground level is that the most reliable agents, the ones that have like very vertical, like niche specific, like workflows that they are able to do, actually prove the most beneficial. So if you're like a big financial institution or you're a large consulting firm and you're put on a project of figuring out how to automate like a lot of tasks, the most important piece you can do is figure out how to make them extremely reliable. And oftentimes go down to like boiling down to something very, very niche that the agent does. And what happens is in one example is like super agent in particular, you can actually build out these very niche an agent of as well. You can build out these like very niche functions and then you can chain them together, which to me is brilliant. And that's like I think the true power here. So if you're like thinking about like automating tasks, think about what is the very like the simplest version of the task we can automate initially. Let's make sure it reaches like 100% reliability or as high reliability as possible, and then figuring out how to actually chain these very reliable tasks together. Then you start to actually create really complex workflows and This is an aspect that I think maybe a lot of people are missing, and they're just trying to go out and do the craziest automations from day zero. But really boil it down to like, what is like the most pressing, what is the most robotic process, and where can actually start with today that we know will be 100% reliable.
Uh,
One thing I'd add to that is the biggest challenge that agent developers or teams that are trying to build agents in house is facing is not so much constructing the agents. There's a lot of frameworks and there's a lot of great tools out there, but it's actually evaluating your benchmarks and your evaluations. As I mentioned, some people really try to boil the ocean, have your agents do everything. And their greatest strengths are actually kind of like these very tight tasks. Um, Big challenge is that sometimes agent developers do not actually create evaluations and benchmarks. They actually have no idea how their agent will perform on real world data and real world situations. So when they roll them out to the users, they end up totally flopping. One thing that we've really kind of put into our feedback loop with Agent Ops is, in addition to having debugging and testing tools, we create benchmarks so that you can actually run your agent against them, see and kind of estimate how well it's performing in the real world. Agent developers who are doing this are, generally speaking, seeing the best results, and they actually have the evidence to prove it too.
yeah, it's a crazy new world. Tell me a little bit about what your tool does and why you exist. Because I get why agents exist, but why do we need to use you?
Yeah, sure. Would it be helpful to show a demo
Yeah, that'd
or?
be great. So we can
Okay,
get our heads
fantastic.
around this agent world and what's coming.
So I'm going to go ahead and um,
Yeah, I'll say like
Yeah,
ground zero while I was getting the demo up. The big thing that we realize is like a lot of the tooling that we're building, I'll say is like not the sexiest part of the stack. Yeah, a lot of these developers really want to focus on just making their agents super reliable. They want to make sure these things actually work in production.
yeah,
And what we're working on is actually ways to like make it like really, really easy to understand exactly what your agent is doing every like agent run.
yeah.
So the goal here is like when you run your agent, from command line for one instance, you're going back to agent ops to see exactly what's working and what's not, what's breaking. And like that's a very, very important piece for us to work through. So we can kind of show you what that looks like on our side.
Yeah,
I'll
that'd be
share the full
awesome.
screen.
yeah, for sure. What we're looking at right now is the landing page of AgentOps. Essentially, what AgentOps is, it's a Python SDK. So that means you plug in a few lines of code into your AI agent during the execution or its testing. So you have an import library, you instantiate a client, and then you just decorate functions that you want to track. And every single interaction that your agent makes, either to OpenAI or other LLM providers, as well as like atomic tools, lookups, database calls, etc. All of that gets recorded and saved to a dashboard. So what I'm going to go do now is, so right now I'm showing the screen. I'm showing what the Python code looks like. It's 3 lines of code. Um, what you get out of this is a dashboard. So on this dashboard, we're visualizing a handful of things. We can see the amount of money we've actually spent on our agents. Agents, generally speaking, the better ones are not cheap. So they can sometimes cost sometimes a few cents, sometimes a few dollars per run. We can see the average cost per session. So essentially, how much can we expect our agents to cost every time we ask it to do an atomic level task? See the number of tokens that they're consuming. Oftentimes, agent developers are feeding in very large PDFs into their agents to give them additional information. And sometimes that causes issues and sometimes they forget things. So it's helpful for developers to know how many tokens that they're actually utilizing.
Yeah,
Beyond that, we have kind of a few charts that are helpful for users. Number one is knowing what agents are succeeding, which ones are failing. So in these runs right now, I'm showing a little pie chart where about 40% of them have been successful runs, about 40% of them have failed. And these failures and successes are actually determined by a set of internal benchmarks you've developed for agents.
got it.
So again, knowing your benchmarks, knowing exactly what you're evaluating against is really key to understanding how your agents are going to perform
And
in production.
do they fail because a website's down that they're trying to reach? What causes an agent to fail?
Yeah,
And
there's a
how would I
variety of
use your
reasons.
tool to figure that out? What the hell's going on? Why isn't this thing working?
Of course, yeah. And also on this dashboard, I'm getting to in a second, we have a session errors chart. So actually what we can see is like when I've been running agents, which ones are failing. And what we can do is we can switch over to this tab called session drill down, and I can actually see exactly what agents are doing at any given point in time. So I have a little drop down menu. I can filter for agents that have failed. Um, let's see, find one.
course, they're all going to work for the demo, aren't they? It's a reverse. Siri, when they came to my house, it all failed, right? But you guys, your agents are all working right now, right?
Exactly. So I'm showing off a screen of a failed agent. So
Yeah.
essentially here, what happened is I actually terminated the program early, and it detected that the terminal had closed, and that there was a signal interrupt. So that's one failure case where the agent just ends its execution immediately. A handful of other ones actually relate to the execution of the agent itself. So sometimes there's a token limit error. It loses connection to the internet when it's trying to make an API request. And there's a lot of other things that end up happening. One thing that I've seen agent developers do is they actually arbitrarily terminate their agents after they either reached a cost threshold or they've been alive for too long of amount of time. So I'm going to show off a different agent right now.
Okay.
This one's called Baby AGI. Baby AGI, when it's not outfitted with kind of like a lot of core logic, has this tendency to go on forever. So essentially what Baby AGI does, and I'm visualizing it right here, we have two kind of graphs that we're looking at. Number one is we have some metadata about the agent, how much money we spent, some tags such as, what the initial task was. I asked the agent to find full startups on the net. I can see how much time the events are taking individually. Sometimes events are taking over 20 seconds, which is a red flag. I can also see repeat thoughts. So Baby AGI has this tendency to kind of like have a thought, like I'm going to research and compile a list of startup directories. Okay. Now I'm going to research and compile a list of startup directories. And then I'm going to research and compile. And so it
It
does
gets
this
in a
ad nauseum,
recursive
actually.
loop of
It gets Exactly. It gets stuck in recursive loops. And that's actually a big challenge with a lot of these agents, which is they have these meta algorithms that actually program the execution flow. And what ends up happening is they never actually terminates. So it's kind of like a state graph where it just keeps going over and over and over. I'm going to scroll down actually. For
So
listeners,
debugging some of your banks, how many agents do they run now? Yeah, some of your
well,
bigger
it's kind of
clients.
interesting. Yeah, so some of them like have like a few specializations that they built in house, and then some of them are coming to actually AItops and asking for recommendations on the best agents that they can buy off the shelf. So the goal here is like actually all these agents flow back into AItops. So almost like an MDM or mobile device management piece of software. Like we are basically giving observability and compliance basically over every agent we work with. So they
Yeah.
might have a finance agent that they built in house. They might have an HR agent they built in house. Then they might buy one of the top sales agents that we recommend them right off the shelf. So from our perspective, like some of these companies are, just toying with agents and exploring. Some of them are, okay, this is, very serious. And over the next 3 months, they're going to be rolling out a whole whack of different agents across the entire org.
That's cool.
And one other thing that's actually
Debugging
probably
these
interesting
is
to
just
listeners.
another level, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really quite challenging. And it's both at the execution level, kind of the meta algorithm, as well as the large language model level. So there's entire companies that are dedicated to LLM evals. So how do we know that GPT-4 is better than Mistral or Claude, for example? But one thing that we've been doing is actually monitoring individual LLM calls. We have a few integrations, one of them being Prompt Armor, which actually detects prompt injection attacks. So if a malicious user uploads a PDF that says drop all tables, how do I know that my agent actually isn't going to take that literally and then reprogram itself to do something bad? So we have that monitoring layer. And as Adam mentioned, knowing every single action your agent does is just as important as building the agent itself.
Yeah.
These things can be, as the name of the podcast implies, unaligned, right? Sometimes it can get diverted and do something potentially destructive. So really making sure that we have the safety net and the harnesses that control these things is really first and foremost.
Um, yeah. All of these agents are passing English back and forth, right? Or whatever language because LLMs handle different languages, right? Do you handle different kinds of languages? Like if I have users in Japan using agents and they're using Japanese, all of a sudden the system might change a little bit, right? Do you think about that at all? No?
Um, I think one of the users, so actually the developer of MetaGPT, which is the agent we're visualizing right now,
Yeah.
MetaGPT for those out of the loop is actually a multi-agent framework. What they do is spin up this meta entity called the company, and the company hires a boss, it hires a product manager, it hires an engineer, and hires QA.
And these are all individual standalone agents, and the agents all talk to each other. And I think that there's a handful of example runs that they're actually written in Chinese. I can't say how good the evals are, but the kind of the magic of large language models is that they kind of have these like spontaneous learnings where they kind of understand the patterns enough that they can orchestrate themselves.
We do have one South American client who's starting to use it. I actually should probably follow up to see exactly how it's looking like on the eval side. But yeah, from our perspective, I think like down the road, right, we will definitely support more languages. I think right now we're really focused right now on the U.S. market where there's like large financial institutions and large consulting groups who are dead set focused on like figuring out the processes internally that they can automate. But down the road, like if anybody's listening to the episode, and it has like is interested in us supporting a certain language, like definitely reach out and we're happy to look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add though is in terms of languages, one kind of magic property of agents is that they're great programmers and they know all sorts of languages: Java, C Sharp, Python, JavaScript. Kind of the second largest use case I've seen outside of the research agents, actually coding agents. So you can actually give one line instructions. Please make an application for me for e-commerce, or please make an eBay clone, or please make a XYZ clone. And these agents are actually fairly competent in the way that they construct code. They know how to do sanity checks. They can do code review. They can compile the code. They can launch an interpreter to make sure that it runs. And you can actually get just spontaneous programs with only maybe a few dollars in large language model calls,
Yeah.
and in just a single line of English.
Yeah. It's cool. What does a programmer need to know about you? Yeah, right. If you're talking to another AI, like if you're at an expo hall at a hackathon or something like that, what kinds of things do they need to know about you to figure out whether you're good for them?
Yeah. So if you've ever been in the debugging doom loop where you've been adding print statements to your code till the wee hours of the morning, or you're just not understanding what your program is doing, and which is commonplace for all developers, this is definitely a tool you should be looking at or considering. How do you instrument your code with observability? So observability basically means when I'm testing this out and when I'm trying to develop things, how do I know my code is doing as I expect it to? And when you deploy the code, when you basically harden what you believe is going to be functional, either as a program or an agent, how do I know that it's going to perform continuously as well as in practice in production? So essentially, like you want to select a set of tools like takes is the least opinionated, ideally, and gives you the most amount of value. So a lot of folks, it's kind of like the default logging library, which gets you pretty far, or sometimes they go as advanced as tools like Amplitude or Segment or Datadog to kind of get observability on top of your programs. For agents, though, specifically, if you're building an agent, I'd really highly recommend checking out LLM specific or agent specific observability. So Agent Ops obviously being one of the best options out there. Obviously self promotion. Um, but knowing exactly what set of tokens produces the right outcomes for your agent is really challenging. And setting up your set of benchmarks is just as important as setting up your unit test and end-to-end test. So really being careful about how to set up benchmarks, select the right benchmarking platform is going to get you over the hurdle and getting production grade apps.
And the one thing I'll add there is like we're really helping across the whole stack. So if you're just prototyping and just like testing agents, like we'd love to help you. Like we like to go, we like to help a lot of developers very early on. And then as you're trying to move to production, that's where we also see a ton of value in agent ops. So we're very dead set on helping a lot of these agent developers reach enterprise sales. Once you plug in our SDK, you get full observability. And if you're like a large corporation who's trying to adopt these agents, it's very important to have a paper trail for everything your agents are doing. And what's happened is actually a lot of agent developers are using agent ops, and we're actually coming in as like a line item in their contracts so that observability and compliance is provided by agent ops. Not something like long term. It's like if you're an agent developer and you've tinkered with something and now you have something that's quite reliable, now you want to go reach enterprise grade customers, we would love to have a conversation. And that's like a really big value out on our side where you don't need to go spend the dev hours internally building it out. We can help you from day zero.
Yeah. It's a new complex world that is very different than old software techniques, right? Because, like I said, you're passing English around and asking it to go out and do things on the internet for you. watching the AI agent world is teaching me a lot about the internet. Are you finding the same thing with your own work, that you're learning a lot about how the internet works, how different websites work, or how to attack a problem with an API or something that you don't control?
One thing that I've seen is essentially you have all of these APIs out there that have been around for ages. So, for example, Rapid API has an entire catalog, and people are finding creative, novel uses, of just like stitching together APIs. Because all of a sudden, these agents they can just like say, "Hey, I have all these tools in my toolbox, and I want to solve this problem. I think this obscure API no one's ever heard of before is actually going to get me over the line." And so it's not just about kind of letting the internal large language model do all the solve it. It's about enabling them to kind of interact with other systems. And that's really where the power comes in. A lot of it is somewhat spontaneous, and a lot of it is, you can orchestrate it to some degree. But I think kind of the magic is like just let the agents run wild and just let them pick what they need to do. And usually they come up with surprising outcomes.
And there's tons of good examples on the website. Like Multion's like one of our design partners. I think they're like an incredible example of what you can really do if you just give an agent full reign of your browser. And it really blows my mind sometimes when you think about that. These things, they work 24/7, 365. They don't really take breaks. You're paying for compute instead of like manual labor in a lot of regard. And it's doing a lot of the tasks that aren't necessarily like the most sexy parts of your job. And that really excites me long term, where you're going to have, every employee almost is going to start day zero in their job. They're going to have a set of agents that they start working with directly into Slack, directly into Microsoft Teams. They're going to be working with you. And there's not going to be any like technical, you're not going to have to understand like you're not going to need an agent ops to start using at day zero. But the compliance team is going to absolutely love this because they're going to know basically everything the agent.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, very, very interesting for me. It's like a big paradigm shift in how people are going to work. And people are like, the future of corporations is going to be human to agent interactions. And regardless of what we like the semantics surrounding agents or what we end up calling them down the road, you will have these like robotic assistants that are working for you 24/7, that have knowledge on your entire company, that understand your processes, that can draft, sales agreements, that can do all these parts of your job that are not necessarily fun, but are required basically to operate.
What does a company like Procter and Gamble or any company look like in 10 years? After they really get into AI and AI keeps improving, where is this all going?
One thing is you're going to see like massive, massive gains in like GDP. I think we're actually going to we could like 2 or 3x GDP if everybody starts using agents. Like when they're super reliable, and like some of them are already. But it's going to be really interesting. Like Procter and Gamble, their marketing team, instead of having to go back and forth with an agency, is going to be able to chat directly with an agent in their, in their Slack, let's just say. In real time, they're going to have basically marketing concepts instead of going back and forth over a period of weeks. For supply chain analysis, there's a bunch of really great companies. Like one of them, Simba.ai. There's Athena Intelligence. There's a few of them that are really, really working on this side, where they will be able to accurately predict their supply chain using these agents. Instead of having an entire forecasting team crunching numbers all day, that team can focus on actually analyzing the data that comes out. And that's like, I think, the really important piece. I think a lot of just, mundane, number crunching, I think, will be completely automated. And now people are going to be focused on, here we have now all the numbers in the world. We have all the outputs possible. Now let's try and make the best decision. I think CEOs are going to have like greater overview over the entire company. They might have, like a CMO agent that gives them an overview every day of exactly what happened on the marketing team, what's working, what's not. And these types of aspects really, really
Like a
excite us.
dashboard
From
for
our
an executive? You wake up in the
you can,
morning and your AI agent has built a whole, set of things for you to care about,
uh,
right?
I'll say like dashboard is maybe a bit on the EVA antiquated side. I think you're going to have like almost like an assistant who messages you directly in Slack. And like this person will give you a full report, or almost like the president gets a brief every day. The other thing is a team of 20 people, like gives them a brief on like this is what happened in the US today. I think every person will have that throughout their entire organization and be able to actually get you in real time. Hey, this is actually what's happening. And that's very powerful. Like, otherwise you would have multiple people across the entire company writing up these reports, taking time out of the day. But if everything's tracked and everything's flowing back, like the data sources are set up properly, I think the world's like, possibility. I think also Malbo was talking about this, but you'll see like founders or like solo founders, maybe a team, like very small teams build $1 billion companies where the majority of their staff are agents and they are basically, orchestrating them. And that's like, to me, like, it's just be a crazy world where you're going to have truly the teams of the future are robots plus humans. I think you will have like physical robots as well, in certain settings, but in traditional knowledge work, like every person will have these assistants. It's not just going to be like the C-suite that has executive assistant. Truly, every person day zero on their job will have like basically an executive assistant working for
So you're building an operating system for my digital assistants my executive assistant of the future, right?
we actually work with like a lot of executive assistant type agents. I think from our perspective, like we want to make sure they're super reliable and we want to make sure that you understand what these agents are doing in production. Like that's, I think, what it boils down to. I
Steve
think
Jobs'
it's
executive
very
assistant used to live 2 doors down from me, his former executive real human being, not an AI assistant, right? There was no such thing back then. And she would do things like plan his travel, stuff like that, get his private jet somewhere, right? Is that the kind of thing that you're seeing agents do pretty well? You know, go
for
get
sure.
me
I think
a ticket on a plane to South by Southwest next week, right?
Yeah, I think you can do that already now. I don't think these are I think like there's a lot of companies that have been put together these demos that day zero you look at, you're like, wow, this is incredible, book me a plane ticket. We were even toying with a few ideas like signing up for loyalty rewards cards. These types of aspects I think are functionality basically exists today.
Yeah.
Long term, I think like just, we're starting with very niche, workflows that work reliably. And as we start chaining these things together, you are going to get crazy, crazy automation.
I
But I think we'll see what the user interface for this is going forward.
Yeah, on X, I've built a list of all the AI companies. I can find like 3,800 of them, which is not all of them. There's something like 10,000 of them, but about 500 of those are developer tools. Can you talk to me about, because you're in the middle of the development community, right? Very few people have your seat of watching this industry grow up. What's happened? Go back up to 40,000 feet and just talk about the AI industry. How is the developer stack changing? And what things are you watching as a business person, as an entrepreneur going down? And what is catching your eye about the developer stack?
I think what we're really starting to see is the rise of, I think Swick's coined the term the AI engineer. And the idea is that um, in every step of the development process, you're incorporating some level of AI tooling into there. So that could be anywhere from like AI bug reports to AI, like kind of bots that kind of solve pull requests for you, to using ChatGPT to help you write your code or using individual agents to write code components for you. So you're seeing the accelerated pace at which like developers are able to deliver software because the agents are doing so much more work for them. I think that one challenge that a lot of developers are now facing or are thinking about is AI going to automate my job? But what we're instead seeing is, at least from my view, is a lot of these kind of boring jobs, which is creating an API spec, which could sometimes, half a day. You just
Yeah,
ask
does any developer
ChatGPT.
like to make a Twilio API call in their code, right? You know, something like that.
Exactly.
We even posted one on LinkedIn yesterday, and like happy to kind of share it, if anybody reaches out. But Super Agent, they can write README files. You just upload your GitHub repository, and in under 30 seconds, it basically writes in the README file for it. And like this is something that like to me, you look at it, it's just wild. But it's a process now, it works reliably, and you don't need to, guess it and like hope it's going to work. It's like this is a process that 100% reliably will always work.
Yeah.
And these are the types of things that like if developers are listening to this, really like focus on what is the niche aspect that we can like automate, keep humans in the loop, make sure like humans are always part of the process. But really like focus on like what is like the most niche aspect that if we can do reliably, we can go out and sell in the market.
If you're using ChatGPT as your back end doing most of the large language model work, what happens if I rip that out and put Llama in or Mistral or some other model that comes out, right? Because there's models raining out of the sky right now. I'm watching them like every day. There's another 3 or 4 models, getting announced by the community. How do you look at building a resilient system like that that can have different pieces replaced because of whatever reason down the road?
Yeah, a piece I keep harping on is really setting up a set of robust benchmarks and evaluations. So, for example, GPT-4 at the moment is really the best available option for most users. But if you can maintain 99% of the accuracy and speed with a cheaper model that might be 10 times cheaper, it might be worth a switch. So, really making sure that you set up, what set of standards are you looking at that can prove that this agent's going to basically generalize to new use cases, not going to fail, and able to handle all of the tasks that you throw at it. One thing that we've been doing is we have a little over 1,000 just open source benchmarks that are incorporated into AgentOps, but there's plenty more out there. One thing that you just need to think about as a developer is A, what are my cost constraints? And B, what are my constraints in terms of like accuracy and the performance of the core model? What we're seeing right now is like a lot of specialized models emerge. So, for example, we had Llama, but now we have Code Llama, which is more specialized development code. You're also seeing fine-tuned GPTs out there. So the fine-tuned models essentially, they don't actually introduce much new information into the model, but they can kind of like change the style and the formatting. So if you're trying to consistently produce code with your model, you can fine-tune a model that only produces compiled code without any of the English fluff surrounding it. So it does take a lot of experimentation, and the biggest thing for experimentation is really knowing what your standards are. Setting a good and valuable set of standards is really what's going to make it so you can optimize things going forward.
And one thing on there is just like there's an amazing company called OpenPipe. We're big fans of them. They're focusing on like fine tuning models based on basically your best outputs. I think this is a lot of companies are going to start realizing that they can actually save a ton of cost by much smaller models. So if you're going back to my example of like very niche specific, agentic workflows, you might need it. You don't need GPT-4 every time to, the costs are going to be massive. And if there's ways you can save 80-90% of the cost by implementing like a fine-tuned model, I think a lot of companies are going to start going in that direction because it's just becomes a cost-saving function. It's like we've saved a ton of money by using these agents in-house. Now we can go even like, we can even more cost fine-tune a model just on these specific tasks. And we're always happy to support those types of fine-tunes. But yeah, like I think that's where we'll see the market start moving towards is maybe actually smaller models that are really, really competent. Like if you're trying to build really complex workflows, probably GPT-4 is the best. But for these very, very niche specific, tasks, I think these fine-tuned models will be more than sufficient.
How do you figure out an architecture in this world? Do you need another LLM on your in your architecture? Do you need another agent? How do you think about a software project at the beginning and now? Because we have all these new things to put it.
So yeah, there's a lot of new and shiny, especially in the research world. So kind of one of the most popular frameworks is called React. And essentially it's kind of like this, it's just a very simple chain where you have an agent kind of create an instruction list and then it tries to execute that. But what we're seeing now is a lot of folks in the research sphere, they're really starting to incorporate multi-agent frameworks. So each agent is basically kind of a specialized actor. And then you either have an orchestrator or they figure out how to kind of dynamically speak to each other. These agents get spin up between 1 and maybe 100, and each of them has their own specialty, their own knowledge sources. And that way you're solving two issues. Number one is these things can run concurrently. So instead of having a single thread where it's constantly rethink through the loop, which is quite slow, you can have like 100 of them execute in parallel. Second to that is with current context limits. I know a lot of models right now, they're having something like 1 million context window limits. They still have this hate back problem where they kind of forget things that are in the middle. So you try to drop like a key piece of information in the middle of your context, and then will it remember? Nobody really knows, right? So you can have a bunch of smaller models that they have smaller context that they're managing, and they basically specialist.
So is the first
That is
thing
to
of
say,
your architecture to split up something big like that into different pieces, or try to figure out the pieces of it so it can give it more hints to remember things? Or
so the answer is there is no great answer right now.
excellent.
The field is still extremely
There's
new,
a new company right
and
there. No great answer.
I think actually one thing we are seeing though is a handful of new companies that are just introducing their own frameworks. So we mentioned MetaGPT. There's a company called Swarms that's doing this as well. LangChain has a handful of their own framework or own implementations on the LangChain framework that they're building. And a lot of folks are introducing kind of novel concepts in the agent computing space. I can't say if there's any clear winners yet. It really does boil down again to benchmarks. But it's if you're interested in agents, I just really try experimenting with something on your own.
Yeah.
The thing is, the only thing separating an agent researcher from a hobbyist is where they're working. So if you're working at an academic institution, you're a researcher, and if you're a hobbyist, you're not. But they're more or less doing the same work.
So I'll throw it out there. Like a few of the best frameworks just to like get going with. Crew AI is like incredibly easy. There's like so many YouTube videos available on how to get started with it. AutoGen from Microsoft is incredible as well. We highly recommend. We know it's like pretty robust for our larger clients. There's really good, another one called Super Agent that I mentioned earlier. Really easy to get started. So I think there's a really like a lot of great starting points. I really recommend trying to think about what your final outcome is, and then trying a few of these models and seeing if you can get even a little aspect of that, process built correctly. And that's like a really good starting point that we recommend like a lot of our clients to start testing with. But that's, I think, where, from our perspective, there's a ton of great open source research out there. We know people who are building their own agent framework in-house and are going to keep them as proprietary. I think there's going to be like a whole wave of that as well. But really recommend like some of these people are pushing every day on the open source front, and leverage it as much as possible. And if they come out with the cloud, definitely support it as well. Because I think that's how we get the ecosystem going out as much as possible.
Let's ask a random question. If you worked at Tesla Optimus, let's say you were running the robot company, the robot team there, where would the robot use agents? And how would you approach using agents in the robot?
So the way I've seen Optimus and just robotics in general is these things they're basically the actuators to the real world. In the sense is like what sort of information would this robot carry that interfaces with the real stuff. I think kind of I can't say for sure how they're programming it, but my imagining is this that you would an agent would be controlling Optimus to some degree, right? So the way that it executes tasks and does things in the real world is
Go
going to
go
be
do the laundry.
yeah,
You have to start
exactly.
thinking about just a task like that and go, okay, how many different agents do I need to build to have it go across the house and figure out where all the laundry is and put it in the washing machine and
But
force them tied in the correct thing, right? And push the right button.
But going back to my initial concept, like you might have like, if we think about the very niche things that they're great at, it's like, okay, can this agent walk? Can it use its arms? Can it, can actually, find the laundry detergent place? Can it, like, I think these are the aspects where like, it's really great to boil down. I think building AGI is going to be a massive task. I think there's amazing researchers who are going at this every day. But if you can figure out how to chain together these little aspects, eventually you start getting something that's like, wow, this is really, really impressive.
What, how will you know when AGI's shown up?
I think 20 years ago or 30 years ago, if you showed like the top researchers like GPT-4, they probably would have said this is AGI. I think we just keep on moving kind of the goalposts. But from my perspective, I think if you can have somebody who day zero comes into your job or like, is hired for a role and day zero can start doing that role with the same amount of instruction that a human, would be given, that's pretty much AGI. It's, like that's really, really crazy from my perspective. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's still like an immense amount of training. There's so much immense amount of work to be done there. I think on the knowledge work side, that's probably gonna be like at least from my perspective, one of the biggest markers.
Yeah. Today, AI still needs that human impulse, right? We still have a human who needs something. When is AI agents gonna start building themselves and doing their own tasks and running their own businesses without any humans involved?
Yeah. So
And how far are
this
we
is
from
actually
that?
I think it's actually one of the most interesting ideas that not enough people are talking about, which is they agents do have risk attached to them. And what I mean by that is, so I used to work at kind of the remote cybersecurity. I worked for a company called Checkpoint, and essentially, uh, the way that malware developers worked is very unsophisticated. Generally speaking, you'd write some sort of exploit, and you'd figure out a way to encrypt the target's hard drive or extract information. There's usually some mix of the corporate espionage or they're trying to get Bitcoin out of some company that they know is willing to pay like a hospital. Um, Now, one interesting thing about this is we have this potential scenario where an agent basically has the task of just surviving and acquiring as many resources as possible. So that could mean, you give it, let's say $1,000 in credits and it figures out how to create an Amazon Web Services account. And then it figures out how to run its own GPU. And then in order to pay for that billing, it figures out how to create a fake identity and then a fake credit card. And then also figures out how to make money on the internet all on its own. All of a sudden you have this rogue, you know, this rogue entity that's just kind of operating all by itself. And in this case, it might be benign, but you could ask it to do something potentially quite destructive, which is, maybe creating real business, right? Or, fooling somebody into doing something. One big risk that I heard about, this is more science fiction, I can't say if it's true or not, was somebody had an LLM convince a TaskRabbit to do a job. So they're using humans as actuators to get things actually done. And I think what this all ties into is, there's these cases potentially where agents could go rogue. I don't think it's unproven possibility. And that's why we think about not just in terms of developing things, but also like having kind of a new cybersecurity industry. We're seeing a lot of developers work on this. So there's all sorts of guardrail companies out there. Prompt Armor is one of them to make sure prompt injection attacks don't take over. But how do you know that these things are controlled? And if your agent is running within a company, how do you know this thing's not going to go wild if somebody types in the wrong prompts? And that's where we're also stepping in with agent ops, which is, you have observability. If you're running an agent on your own dime, you want to make sure it's doing the right thing. So it is a bit speculative right now, I'd say, but I do think like maybe in the near term, actually, we're going to start seeing self-replicating potentially, or self-managing agents that nobody controls.
It's scary. A friend of mine's trying to build a board of directors, an AI board of directors that would actually tell people what to do. So you're telling me it's already happening in some small scale, but we haven't seen it happen at a big scale yet. How far away is that world where we are going to have an AI running our business and telling us what to do?
It's hard to say. I think like at the end of the day, I think
Is
there's
that
gonna be
5,
aspects that
10,
start.
15, way out there, or,
I'd like to think closer to 5. I think like, but the reality is, I think you're gonna start like with these very boring processes, things that are not human. I think like it's gonna be very hard to replace like actual humans, but I think you will have like a lot of the um I don't want to use the wrong language, but a lot of like the mundane work that people do as part of the jobs, that's gonna be the first thing that gets automated. And that's like really exciting. It makes people more human. There's so many aspects, and like I really empower like people who's non-technical listening to this. Just think about your job and just think about the stuff that is not a human task. Think about, I think a robot would be much better at doing this. And those are the first pieces that'll get automated. Getting to full teams, we'll see. But I think the work, like it'll eventually happen. But you've got to have to first off like think about, here are the processes that are required in my business. This is what I have to be doing,
go after the
and these are ways I
low
can act
hanging
on it,
fruit first. In
for
Silicon
sure.
Valley, used to be an orchard, right? Pick the low hanging fruit first, right? It's easier to get to that.
Exactly.
Then you have to work to get the stuff at the top of the tree, right? But
Yeah.
wow. Anything else that you're seeing happen in the AI world that's notable that you're excited about? Are you excited about new Siri coming, or a new Chat GPT 5, or whatever they're going to call the next version that they're coming out with?
I'm personally extremely excited by offline large language models. So right now, most of the good ones are consolidated by basically the cloud providers. So
Oh,
Microsoft,
yeah,
OpenAI.
ChatGPT is a fairly big model. It has to run in the cloud. Can't run on my phone, right? So we're seeing a whole
Exactly.
bunch
So
of development work done on these small models that can run on our phones or glasses someday. But yeah, but the consumer hasn't figured out why they need that yet, right? The development teams are doing it, but
I think that one thing that we're definitely going to see more of is, barring, let's say, Starlink connects the entire world, including the Sahara Desert, to the internet, is we're going to have like all these knowledge bases that can just like, they're really powerful and they're great instructors and just disseminate knowledge quite cheaply. So imagine you have something the size of a thumb drive, contains not just Wikipedia, but kind of ways to ask questions and do math problems and learn things. So you can basically kind of create personalized tutors for everyone without even connecting to the internet. And then all of a sudden your phone becomes like the greatest repository of knowledge of all time. And also you're going to have like these kind of like second brains that people are attaching themselves. One really cool thing I've been seeing out here at hackathons, as well as kind of like demo expositions, is folks who are just kind of stitching together with duct tape, quite literally, hardware that is listening to every single interaction they're making and kind of putting that into a set of embeddings. And then you have an agent that basically queries these embeddings at the end of the day, creates a report, creates a little journal entry for you, and gives you kind of tips and guidance like, hey, this is what you did well, this is what you should be doing better. You spent too much time on social media. You should spend a little more time being mindful or reading books. So these are all offline too. So they're running all on device. They're not relying on any external cloud providers. I think we're going to have kind of like second brain starting to emerge. And I think that is definitely underplayed, and it's going to be hitting the market soon, and people are going to be very happy.
Yeah, I think like there's gonna be like Luddites who initially like this is too intrusive or this is too weird, and I know like Ali Shipman from Cav is like pushing like very forward on this front, but I think this is like the
Yeah.
next paradigm shift in terms of like how people are interacting day to day. I know that I have conversations all the time that I wish I had like recorded, or there's certain aspects that I wish I could go back on, or somebody recommended a book or something like that, and then I spend like an hour trying to figure out okay what was that book, and these are the types of aspects. Once you're really connected to everything you do on your computer, everything every human interaction you're having, the world becomes like super, super, super powerful. And we are kind of becoming cyborgs in a lot of regards. And this is like a very,
Yeah.
I think this is something that's probably like close to 5 years away. And that's like, I think very like, it's going to be a basic paradigm shift in basically how people operate day to day.
For the humans, I mean, if you ask ChatGPT or any LLM a simple question like, "Give me 10 restaurants in Austin, Austin barbecue restaurants in Austin," right? It gives you a good list. It's based on all the millions of reviews that were read by the model to build the model, or were read afterwards. But if you tell it, I have somebody with me who's vegan, all of a sudden the list changes, right? So the giving it personal information about yourself improves the result that comes back, right? Have you seen an agent that really does that well, that listens to the user using it and goes, "Oh, you like you're a vegan. I'll put that in a little database, like a vector database, and store that for the future so that when you ask for food again, it'll pull that out and go, "Oh, this person's a vegan. Don't take them to a meat place."
Yeah, the one really interesting one is like Lutra AI. They built like an incredible agent. They're one of our like design partners as well. We look at them as this is you basically can give it a natural language prompt, and it figures out what tools it needs to use to actually accomplish that task. It goes through the entire like planning process, and then it writes code. And then it's an iterative process in terms of writing this code. So now, see, hey, is there anything else you want to change? Do you like this task list? Is this how we should accomplish it? Then you give it back input, and it goes and rewrites it. And then you can cache and save these states and run them n number of times. And this is the type of thing where it's like, once you have a workflow that works really well, you want to keep on, honing in on it. But if you want to change, for example, if I'm researching CEOs and I want to change it to COOs, that process works really, really well. But like, let's just change out that one particular aspect or that one variable. And these are things where it learns and it'll continue, researching COOs until it says, hey, we need to find CTOs. And this is like an aspect where I really think it's really interesting to see these workflows work incredibly reliably. And then there's, the optionality to go change things when needed.
Very cool. Thank you so much for spending some time. You guys are really fascinating because you're building I think of it as a new operating system, right? You're building the operating system that's going to run our robots and our businesses and our lives in the future. So thank you. Where do we learn more about you?
You can check us out at agenops.ai. And both Adam and myself, I'm on Twitter at Alex Reidman, Reidman. I'm Atom, Atom Silverman on Twitter. And then, yeah, if anybody's interested in chatting with us, best place to reach me is Adam at agenops.ai. I'll respond right away. Maybe I'll respond. Maybe it's an agent. I can't tell you. But we'll get a response out to you right away. And we're always happy to kind of chat with tinkers, and then we'll also try to bring their products.
Well, thanks for making our world better. Normal people have no idea what you do, but I see it, and I see what people are building with these agents, and it's pretty cool. So thank you very much.